This here is a supposedly broken gaming PC that I purchased on eBay for $250 USD, plus about 20 bucks in shipping. I don't actually know what is even in this rig. The original eBay listing is taken down. All we have at our disposal is this title. Now it does look like all of the primary components are in here, albeit they seem to be very cheap. The graphics card has DVI and VGA display outs, which is never a good sign. That means we're looking at something like a GTX 1050, possibly older. The Intel platform is using a motherboard that is extremely small. This is definitely several generations old as well. A single very tiny DIMM. Looks like there's not even a DIMM in here, it's so small. And the power supply from Apevia may or may not be questionable. We'll have to dive into that in a bit. The tempered glass on this very cheap mid-tower is just hanging on by a thread. It's missing one of its 4 thumb screws to hold it together, and the metal standoffs are questionable at best. We don't have any rubber stoppers here to sort of insulate the glass and protect it from the metal, so it just kind of flops around. Like, there's nothing actually holding this. You can see I've got the thumb screws tightened all the way down, and there's still a ton of play in this glass. Not great vibes all around, but again, 250 bucks. I'm more worried about whether or not we can actually fix this sight unseen and less worried about, you know, value. So before I'm inundated with comments like, oh, Greg, you're setting a bad example. Nobody in their right mind should ever spend this much money on a terrible value rig like this. It's not about value at all. I just want to know if I can fix a system, again, sight unseen, that I know virtually nothing about. I have no idea if this system even powers on. So we're more in the dark here than we ever would be in a fix or flop video, which should be exciting for a lot of you, and it's gonna be pain and misery for me. Only time will tell. Stay with me. If you're planning your next PC build, then consider checking out our sponsor, VIP SCD Key. Their Windows 10 and 11 OEM keys sell for a fraction of retail and will unlock the full potential of your OS. They'll also remove those pesky activation watermarks. Click the links below to get started today, and be sure to use our special offer code SKGS for a sweet discount on a variety of options, including Windows 10 and 11, Pro and Home, and more. Now, before we power the system on for the first time here in the office, I want to give things a quick once-over, visually inspect every area that usually is involved with a broken system like this. So namely your major connections, 24-pin AP and EPS, want to make sure the graphics card's all the way inserted, DRAM's inserted properly. We'll check the power supply as well, make sure there aren't any burn marks. And I can tell you just from a quick glance here at the rear, I already see a big problem. So a quick POV here, you can see that 4-pin CPU power cable is fully inserted. Same goes for the 24-pin here. I did triple check that this DRAM is fully inserted, although it is quite small. The graphics card is fully slotted, and one way you can tell very easily is if you can see any golden finger exposure there. That is a telltale sign that your card is not all the way inserted. This one is, however, sometimes that can go wrong in shipping, so it doesn't hurt to check that. Smaller cables look to be okay. We'll confirm front panel a bit later, although I would be pretty surprised if that was the only issue here. But the thing I noticed at the rear, behind the power supply, you'll see this one little switch here that says 230 volts. Yeah, the last time I checked, the US ain't on 230. I've said it before and I'll say it again, electrical circuits, especially AC current, was one of my toughest subjects in school, so I do not claim to be anything even remotely close to an expert in this subject matter. What I will say though, is that most power supplies that have this toggle switch on them are either A, quite old, or B, quite cheap in their design. Most modern power supplies will have this switch built internally. It'll know automatically based on the input voltage what setting it should be in. And it's likely that either there's a blown fuse in here because the wrong input voltage was selected, or that the power supply is actually working okay, because while it's not receiving the full 230 it's expecting, it's still distributing the power correctly. I've seen this before in a few power supplies. I do not recommend you run it at this setting if you're in a 110 or 120 volt country like the US, but old power supplies like this, I try to stay far away from them. All that to say, I do not intend to run the system in its 230 volt setting around a 115 volt environment, or 110 or 120, somewhere around there. We're gonna set it to 115 before powering on. By the way, the system shipped exactly as you see it here, with this right panel like slightly inserted, but not all the way, and so it's kind of hanging like so. This tells me that somebody's been in here. I'm curious what it looks like behind the motherboard tray. I really hope this shot's in focus. Difficult to get it to actually hone in on something that's just basically solid black here. Let's see what we're dealing with. Come on. A bit jank for sure. Yeah, All right, it is pretty messy, and you could probably get a better idea now of how old this power supply is. Ketchup and mustard cables, yeah. Also a lower gauge. It's just not meant for higher end, more modern solutions. Looks like we've got an RGB controller of sorts here. This looks to be wired correctly. We've got 3 fans connected to it, the 2 up top and the 1 at the rear. And let's check out this hard disk drive. I was curious about storage because it, again, wasn't... Whoa. What on earth is going on here? That is completely mangled. Oh yeah, you bet. We are definitely pulling this thing out. You know, I really want to know what eventually led to this. I mean, this is like the worst I think I've ever seen a hard drive mangled. Both SATA power and SATA data are completely trashed here. Just got bits of plastic just falling off of it. Like, were they connecting the wrong cables to this? Like, how does it get this bad? I don't think this is what was keeping the system from actually quote unquote working though. This is kind of like an isolated thing. You could very easily remove this. In fact, it was detached, you saw when we took the right side panel off. So I don't even think it was a part of the equation here. We are going to now attempt to fire the system up as is with that hard drive disconnected and with the power supply switch at the rear flipped to 115. I'm not sure if I should have a fire extinguisher on standby. We're just gonna go for it. Power on at the rear. Okay, so far so good. Power on up front. It would help if my power strip was on. Let's try this again. Oh, would you look at that? It does at least appear to power on. Somewhat. Okay, yeah, it doesn't look like that's gonna happen. Let's try, we don't have to worry about front panel. I mean, it powers on, so obviously front panel's already wired correctly. We can try removing the graphics card and running off of integrated graphics. I don't know what CPU is in here. This Intel chip looks old enough. It looks like it probably does have integrated graphics. So we can try directly through the motherboard. And if that doesn't work, we can test the power supply. I have a feeling the power supply is going to be to blame here, just again, because of the previous setting that we saw and just how jank it looks like things are wired behind here. One thing's for sure, this Intel stock cooler has not ramped down its fan curve at all since powering on. It is just running full speed. And that tells me that we probably haven't gotten through any bit of the post process. Ow, really hate these coolers. I'd also like to point out while we're taking this out that just because the power supply was set to the 230 volt position, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was powered on in that position. It could have been, I don't know, swapped at the last minute for some reason. It's very unlikely, but still worth noting. And for those wondering, by the way, this is an even older car than I thought, a GTX 650. A 1 gig frame buffer on this bad boy. I don't think this is gonna work, but I just wanna rule things out one by one here so we can remove the graphics card as a potential failure point. Alrighty, it does still power on. The fan curve is still ramped up to 100%. It doesn't sound like it wants to chill out. I've got a sneaking suspicion we've a power supply problem. That or the power supply used to be the problem, and now there are multiple problems because it created them. It maybe fried the motherboard, maybe it fried the CPU. Who really knows? A dirty power supply is so dangerous, and it can cost you a ton of money in the long run. And still no picture. I think it's time to test the power supply. Oh wow, yeah, it is not liking quite a bit about this power supply. This is like an instant replace in my book if this was fix or flop. That's exactly what we're gonna do here as well. So this entire thing is just one big mess. Again, not surprised. What we can do very quickly here is try powering the system on with a known working unit. We're gonna take our trusty nightjar from Silverstone, hook that up, try powering on, hoping it works. If it doesn't, then we have more than one issue with this rig, which is what I feared. A bad power supply can do a lot of damage, and I'd be willing to bet this unit doesn't have a ton of fail-safes in place. I really can't believe there's a GTX 650 in this pre-build. I thought it was something a little more modern than that. It's it really just destroys any notion of value that this rig would have had. Alrighty, so that's in. We've got our 24 pin connected. And yeah, let's cross everything we got here that it is only a power supply issue. Ooh, here we go, the suspense. I'm sure you guys already know by looking at the length of this video if this is actually the only fix required or not. Of course, I don't know in the moment. That's what makes it exciting, nerve-wracking, and a bunch of other things all combined. Power on. CPU fan is at 100% just like it was before. Not really a great sign. Assuming the CPU works, how am I gonna test it? Because it's probably on a platform that's much older than anything I have currently on hand, and it likely won't come up in a fix or flop video. Most folks have moved on from like 4th, 5th gen Intel, stuff like that. Well, 5th gen. This is definitely not 5th gen, but you know what I mean. It's just like, it's just older than I thought. And for 250 bucks, it is an absolute ripoff. I don't know why I thought it was worth buying in the moment. This is a DDR3 DIMM, so we're talking 4th gen Intel or older. Now just to recap, we replaced the power supply under suspicion that the old one was defective. The tester pretty much confirmed that. We still have the exact same issue, the same symptom being exhibited where it powers on but doesn't post or send a picture to a monitor. I have replaced his DDR3 module with one of mine, a G.Skill Trident X DIMM, and we still have the same problem. I have tried both memory slots just in case we have a dead memory channel, either on the controller side or the CPU side, or maybe a bad slot, and still nothing. I've also removed all non-vital cables, so front panel, USB 3, SATA, SATA data, USB 2, and then we also had HD audio. All of that's disconnected. Literally, the only thing connected to the motherboard, apart from the CPU and memory, is this single fan here, which I highly doubt is causing any problems because it's working. That would be strange. And of course, we have nothing. Nothing to show for it except for a black screen. I do want to remove this Intel stock cooler here and at least see what CPU we're working with. You know, it does have USB 3, so it can't be that old. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, I stand corrected. First off, what the heck is a Made in China sticker doing on top of the IHS? This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in a pre-built. And the CPU itself is actually much older than I thought. It's an Intel Core i5-2400. I did not know 2400 supported USB 3. I am awfully confused right now. It's just crazy this thing's on there, and it's just paper. It's like it's a sticker, you know? It's what you'd expect it to be made out of. It's not made out of metal, and even if it was, that would create an imbalance. You'd have different heights across the IHS, and that would still just absolutely obliterate your cooling. So yeah, we're definitely gonna remove that, even though I don't even know if this chip works. The socket does appear to be in decent shape, which I'm a bit surprised by. I don't see any bent or missing pins. I don't see any excess thermal paste that worked its way down into here. Overall, pretty clean. In fact, the entire motherboard, for that matter, looks pretty decent. I do not know what brand this is. I think this is just a straight from China, rehash of something. We'll have to dive a bit deeper later in the video. You can see the Made in China sticker at the bottom, but otherwise no other indicator of who manufactured this. It's not ASRock, it's not Gigabyte, it's not ASUS, at least it's not apparent to me that it's any of those. And so that leads me to believe that, yeah, some corners were cut to assemble this rig. There is one issue I did find. It looks like this one capacitor here is slightly dislodged. I'm not sure, it looks like we've got some stuff just oozing out of it as well. And that could very well be why the system's not posting. Not entirely sure if this is the result of a crappy power supply or not, but yeah, it is clearly sitting crooked. I don't think we have a proper connection here. Oh yes, that is that's exactly what happened. Look at the burn marks on the bottom of this thing. That is not good, and that is right next to this other SMD here, which looks partially dislodged. It looks like there was some power-related issue right here, and the board just said nope. And since then, we haven't gotten a post. There's perhaps a better shot of that other SMD that I was pointing out earlier. I'm not sure if this is like a transistor. There's 3 connections there, but one of them, the connector closest to the camera, looks like it is dislodged. That is a really crappy soldering job. This might have just been manufacturer error. Can't say for certain. I just know that the power supply wasn't great, and this isn't great either. The CPU's so old, there's really nothing I can do with it at this point. I'll keep it just in case we happen to come across a fix or flop episode where we need something that old, although I doubt it. And same goes for this GTX 650. I want to test this in this video. I want to see if we can get this thing to post, but at the end of the day, who really cares? Again, it's so old and so cheap. It's actually worse than a lot of integrated graphics today, if I'm being frank. And so I almost feel guilty even giving this away to somebody, because chances are, if they don't have a graphics card at all, they're probably better off that way than with this in their system. That does sound pretty bad, but it is true. In she goes then. Wait a minute. This card is designed in such a way that the shroud hangs over the golden fingers here. This is the area of the card that slots into, well, the 16-lane slot on a traditional motherboard. This is really strange. I guess it worked in the original rig because the full-length slot was at the very bottom of the board, so there's nothing below it to obstruct and prevent the shroud from sitting where it needed to. But in our modern board, you can see it's hitting like the CMOS battery, it's hitting a bunch of other stuff that it shouldn't be. And well, that's not the motherboard's fault. In fact, most cards don't have this problem because the shroud is intentionally not located directly above the connectors. This is just silly all around. Also worth pointing out that someone has definitely been inside of this card. You can see that little warranty seal there is broken. So, I mean, maybe it was repasted. That would actually be a good thing. Although for a card like this, not sure if it matters much today. So this next scene is not going to be cringe at all. This is my sarcastic face. I'm going to install a Ryzen 5 5600 here. The B550 motherboard, a single DDR4 DIMM that I know works. And I'm literally just going to set this cooler atop the chip. No thermal paste, no thermal pad, just literally for a few seconds. I have the GTX 650's shroud entirely removed for obvious reasons we just discussed. This is the only way to make it work with a modern motherboard, which is just ridiculous. I cannot believe what this is coming to. Now, we're just gonna power on and try for a post.
12 seconds later.
So far, we've got nothing. Card is also, it's not getting very hot. I don't feel it warming up at all, which is not a good sign. It should be getting should be getting hot. Now I know through the thermal cam, it looks like the GPU itself, which is centered there, is a lot hotter than its surroundings, but in reality, it's only about 20, maybe 15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than ambient. That is nowhere near as hot as it should be. I think we have a serious power delivery issue on this card. And of course, still no post. So, wow, this was just one big flop. So yeah, this was a disaster. I don't know what I was thinking spending 250 bucks on this. This isn't even worth $250 like fixed, like working. It's certainly not worth that broken, but even if we assume all these components work, it's still not worth 250 bucks in my book. The graphics card's maybe worth 10, 20 bucks. The CPU maybe 20 bucks tops. The motherboard maybe another 10, $20. The power supply I wouldn't even accept for free. The hard drive, probably the same deal. I mean, even if it wasn't mangled. And the case is just a hot box. It's cheap. It's missing pretty vital stuff. I don't know what this PC has been through, but I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Thanks so much for watching. That's about all I have left to say in this one. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of it, and I'll catch you in the next one. My name's Greg. Thanks for learning with me. Learning how not to spend $250.